My parents forced me to work in their coal mine at age 12 instead of going to school, so I exposed them and got full custody of my sister. Now, years later, they're trying to kidnap my sister from school. From a young age, my parents hit it into me and my little sister that we had to be mentally resilient. After all, it was the only quality that could prepare you for my family's business, the coal mine industry. So while other kids my age were going to Florida for the summer or eating picnics on the beach, I was working 12-hour shifts underground, only seeing the sunlight when my parents would drive me to work. Deep down, I knew it was wrong, but I cared more about getting their approval more than my happiness. Fast forward to when my younger sister Haley turned 10, because I was 12 and forced to show her the ropes, but Haley was sweeter than me, the type to pick a flower and give it to a random old lady in the park, so she was a lot more sensitive too. When our parents drove away and I showed her how to sort through coal for the first time, she burst into tears. "Why don't mommy and daddy want to hang out with us?" she asked, voice shaking. I knew I had to think on my feet. "Haley, Santa needs our help this year. There were a lot of kids on the naughty list, so he needs our help to find coal for all of them." Suddenly, her tears were replaced with a huge smile. "Are we really that special?" "Yep, and since I'm older than you can just take a break whenever you want, but only when mommy and daddy aren't around." She didn't question me any further, and we spent the rest of the day working in silence. I knew she had done well because in the car, my dad exclaimed, "We are just so proud of you guys." By this point, I had finally realized how conditional their words were, and I just sat in the back seat completely numb. But Haley was still young enough to eat their words up like it was her lifeline. But after the first 3 days, I guess the novelty wore off, because I woke up to her standing over me in tears. "I don't want to go to work today. I want to rest." I covered her mouth with the palm of my hand. I told her if she ever talked like that while our parents were around, I would be really disappointed. You see, I had made the mistake of complaining to my parents before, and if they were in a good mood, they'd just slap me across the face and call it a day. But other times, I didn't get to eat for 3 days straight, and the last thing I wanted was for Haley to suffer the same way I did. So when we got to the coal mine, I let her lie on my bag and use my t-shirt as a blanket, and I'd try to work twice as hard so our parents wouldn't get mad at us for being lazy. It actually sounds crazy saying it out loud, but for so long, this is just the way things were. Unfortunately, I got so good at my job that we never went to school again, because my parents pulled us out and told the state we were being homeschooled. I grew up so strong that by the time I was 14 years old, I was doing stuff that the grown men in the mine could barely even manage. By this point, the Santa lie had stopped working, and she knew it was us versus my parents, but I was still determined, LOL, to build a better life for us. So when I turned 18, I insisted on working for 16 hours a day in the mines instead of 12, and always asked my parents if they needed help with anything. You see, I needed to convince them that I was ready to take over the family business, and it worked. My parents started taking me to their networking events with other coal mine owners. They'd talk me up and make sure that everyone had an amazing first impression of me. After a few weeks, I was able to abandon my family, because one of the people from the networking events went behind my parents' back and offered me the role of manager in their company. And even though I felt bad for leaving my sister behind, I knew that this was the only way to save her. And I was right, because within a year, I had become the boss. The big dog, if you will. Mwahaha. I got such a large signing bonus that I was able to purchase a large stake in my parents' company, except it was completely anonymous. So that's how I was able to get in touch with Tom, the guy who was in charge of the security cameras. You see, my parents had security cameras to prevent their company from being flagged, except my parents banned him from ever actually checking the footage. So getting him to send over the footage was easy. I just had to lie about who I was. I wanted so badly to post it online, or even send it to local news outlets, but I knew that would upset my sister. So I just sent it to CPS, and the next day, Haley was standing at my doorstep with a social worker. She was extremely skinny, her hair looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks, but she was alive. I gave her a huge hug before inviting her inside to take a nap. I had already decided to file for custody and be her legal guardian. The next day, I saw that me and Haley were famous, but for all the wrong reasons, because my parents had posted videos of themselves on social media saying I had kidnapped and corrupted their daughter, and in the caption was my address. Luckily, it didn't get more than 3K views, but it was still enough for a mob to gather outside my home. Suddenly, I heard my mom screaming to open the door. I froze at the sound of her voice, my hand instinctively moving to shield Haley, who was still sleeping on the couch. The mob outside was getting louder, their shouts mixing with my mother's demands. I grabbed my phone and started recording everything, knowing I'd need evidence of what was happening. My mother's fists pounded against the door so hard I thought she might break it down. Through the window, I could see about 20 people holding signs that said things like, "Return the stolen child" and "Family kidnapper." Some were even live streaming, their phones pointed at my house. I gently woke Haley and led her to the back bedroom, telling her to lock the door and not come out no matter what. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear, clutching the stuffed animal I'd bought her the day before. Racing back to the living room, I called 911 while checking all the locks. The dispatcher said officers were already on their way due to multiple calls about the disturbance. Through the peephole, I watched my father join my mother, both of them playing up their performance for the cameras. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens scattering some of the crowd. Officer Nicholas approached my parents first, and I watched through the window as they immediately started their sob story, pointing at my house and gesturing wildly. My mother even managed to produce tears on command. I opened the door when the officers knocked, keeping the chain on at first until they showed their badges. Two officers, Nicholas and his partner Cole, stood there looking tired but professional. I invited them in, showing them the custody paperwork I'd already filed and the CPS report from yesterday. Cole examined the documents while Nicholas asked me questions about the situation. I pulled up the security footage on my laptop, showing them clips of Haley working in the mines. Nicholas's face went pale as he watched a 10-year-old hauling coal buckets twice her size. My parents must have realized something was wrong, because they started started banging on the door again, screaming that the police needed to arrest me immediately. Nicholas stepped outside to deal with them while Cole stayed with me, calling for backup and CPS to return. Through the window, I watched my parents' faces change from confident to confused as Nicholas spoke to them. My mother tried to grab his arm, but he stepped back, his hand moving to his radio. More police cars arrived, and slowly, officers began dispersing the crowd. The CPS worker from yesterday, Kathy, arrived with her supervisor. They interviewed Haley separately while I waited in the kitchen, my hands shaking as I made coffee. I could hear my sister's small voice from the other room, though I couldn't make out the words. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications. The video my parents posted was gaining traction, but now people in the comments were asking questions. Someone had found public records showing I'd been pulled from school at 14. Another person noted how thin Haley looked in the doorbell camera footage my parents had included. Kathy emerged from the bedroom looking grim. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, explaining that Haley had confirmed everything and more. Apparently, after I'd left, things had gotten worse. My parents had increased her hours and stopped feeding her regular meals as punishment for my betrayal. The police wanted to press charges, but they needed more evidence. I gave them Tom's contact information and forwarded all the security footage I had. Nicholas said they'd be investigating my parents' company for child labor violations and abuse. As evening approached, most of the crowd had dispersed, though a few stubborn supporters remained across the street. My parents had been told to leave the property or face arrest for trespassing. I watched them drive away, my mother shooting one last venomous look at the house. Haley finally emerged from the bedroom, looking exhausted. I made her favorite meal, mac and cheese with extra cheese, and we ate in silence. She kept glancing at the windows nervously, flinching whenever a car drove by. That night, I set up a makeshift bed on the floor of her room. She'd asked me to stay close, and I wasn't about to leave her alone after everything that had happened. As she drifted off to sleep, she whispered that she was glad I'd come back for her. I lay awake planning our next moves. The custody hearing was in 3 days, and I needed to make sure everything was perfect. I'd already contacted a lawyer who specialized in family law, and she'd agreed to take our case pro bono after hearing the circumstances. The next morning brought new challenges. My parents had hired their own lawyer and were demanding visitation rights. They'd also started a GoFundMe claiming they were victims of a conspiracy to destroy their family business. It had raised several $1,000s before I could report it with evidence of fraud. I took Haley shopping for new clothes, since everything she owned was either too small or worn out. She was hesitant to pick anything, constantly asking if it was too expensive. I had to reassure her repeatedly that she deserved nice things. At the store, we ran into one of my parents' church friends. She cornered us in the cereal aisle, lecturing me about honoring thy father and mother. Haley hid behind me as I politely but firmly told her to leave us alone. When she persisted, I loudly asked if she thought child labor was something God approved of. She scurried away, muttering about disrespect. The lawyer, Catherine, met us that afternoon to prep for the hearing. She went through potential questions with both of us, making sure we were ready for whatever my parents might throw at us. Haley practiced her testimony, her voice growing stronger with each repetition. That evening, my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my father, his voice dripping with false concern. He offered to forgive me if I returned Haley and publicly apologized for the misunderstanding. When I refused, he switched tactics, threatening to ruin my reputation in the industry. I recorded the entire call, adding it to my growing pile of evidence. The threats escalated over the next 2 days, with my parents trying everything from bribes to intimidation. They sent flying monkeys, family friends who just wanted to talk, but I recognized the manipulation tactics and refused to engage. The morning of the custody hearing arrived gray and drizzly. Haley wore the new dress we'd bought, looking younger than her 11 years. I'd barely slept, running through every possible scenario in my head. Catherine met us at the courthouse, her presence reassuring. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. My parents sat on the other side with their lawyer, both dressed impeccably and wearing matching concerned parent expressions. My mother had even worn her reading glasses, though I knew she didn't need them. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes, reviewed the case files while we waited. I could see her eyebrows rise as she read through the evidence. When she looked up, her gaze lingered on Haley, taking in her still thin frame and nervous demeanor. My parents' lawyer went first, painting a picture of loving parents whose mentally unstable older child had poisoned their youngest against them. He claimed I'd fabricated the evidence and coached Haley to lie. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of maternal grief. Then Catherine stood up. She methodically presented our evidence, starting with the security footage. The courtroom fell silent as they watched young Haley struggling with equipment designed for adults. She showed the CPS reports, the medical records documenting Haley's malnutrition, and played the recorded phone calls. When it was Haley's turn to speak, I held my breath. She walked to the witness stand on shaky legs, but spoke clearly about her experiences. She described the long hours, the punishments for not meeting quotas, the nights she went to bed hungry. My parents' masks slipped as she spoke, my father's jaw clenching with barely contained anger. The judge asked my parents directly about the child labor. They tried to spin it as teaching work ethic and family bonding time. But when pressed about the safety violations and missed schooling, their stories began to contradict each other. The final blow came when Catherine presented evidence that my parents had been falsifying records to the state about homeschooling. They'd been claiming to provide education while forcing us to work full-time. The judge's expression hardened as she reviewed the documents. During recess, my parents' lawyer approached Catherine about a deal. They'd drop their custody claim if I agreed not to pursue criminal charges. I refused immediately. These weren't just my parents anymore. They were child abusers who needed to face consequences. When court resumed, the judge's decision was swift and decisive. She granted me full custody of Haley with a no-contact order against my parents. She also referred the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution, noting the egregious nature of the abuse. My parents erupted. My mother screamed screamed that I was destroying the family, while my father shouted about ungrateful children. The bailiff had to escort them out as they continued their tirade. I kept my arms around Haley, who was crying with what I realized was relief. As we left the courthouse, Catherine warned us this wasn't over. My parents would likely face criminal charges, and we'd have to testify again. But for now, Haley was safe and officially in my care. That was all that mattered. The next few weeks were an adjustment. Haley started therapy to process everything she'd been through. I enrolled her in school, where she struggled at first, being so far behind academically. But she was determined to catch up, staying after school for tutoring and doing extra homework without complaint. The criminal investigation into my parents' company expanded. More former child workers came forward with their stories. The mine was shut down pending investigation, and my parents' assets were frozen. They tried reaching out through various channels, but I blocked every attempt. Slowly, Haley began to heal. She gained weight, her hair grew shiny and healthy, and most importantly, she started to smile again. She made friends at school and joined the art club, discovering a talent for painting she'd never had the chance to explore. One evening, as we sat doing homework together at the kitchen table, Haley looked up at me. "Do you think they ever actually loved us?" she asked quietly. I thought carefully before answering, telling her that maybe in their own twisted way they did, but that their version of love was harmful and wrong. Real love, I explained, meant wanting someone to be happy and healthy, not using them for your own benefit. She nodded, seeming to understand. Then she smiled and said she was glad she had me. I hugged her tight, promising I'd always be there for her, and I meant it. We'd both survived our parents' abuse, and now we were building something better. A real family, based on love and support instead of fear and control. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more court dates, more therapy sessions, more nights when nightmares woke us both, but we'd face them together, because that's what real family does. They show up for each other, protect each other, and help each other heal. And despite everything our parents had put us through, or maybe because of it, that's exactly the kind of family Haley and I were determined to be. The very next morning, my phone rang at 5 a.m. It was my boss at the coal company, his voice strained and uncomfortable. He explained that several major clients had received anonymous emails claiming I'd embezzled funds and falsified safety reports. Even though he didn't believe the accusations, the board was demanding an immediate investigation. I had to take unpaid leave effective immediately. My hands trembled as I hung up. My parents had found a way to strike back, targeting the one thing that allowed me to provide for Haley. I checked my bank account and calculated we had enough savings for maybe 3 months if we were careful. The timing couldn't have been worse, with Haley needing new school supplies, therapy sessions, and proper nutrition after years of neglect. I didn't tell Haley about losing my job. Instead, I dropped her off at school with a smile, then spent the day frantically applying for positions at other companies. But word traveled fast in the coal industry. Every hiring manager I spoke with mentioned hearing concerning rumors about my work ethic and integrity. My parents had poisoned the well. That afternoon, I picked up Haley from school to find her teacher waiting with a troubled expression. Someone had called the school claiming to be a concerned relative, suggesting I was an unfit guardian who couldn't provide proper care. The teacher assured me she didn't believe it, but the school was obligated to document all such reports. My stomach churned, knowing this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the harassment intensified. Our neighbors started receiving letters warning them about the dangerous kidnapper living next door. Some avoided eye contact when we passed, while others whispered behind their hands. Mrs. Peterson, who used to wave every morning, now pulled her curtains shut whenever we walked by. Haley noticed the change. She asked why people were acting strange, and I struggled to explain without frightening her. I told her some people believed lies about our situation, but we knew the truth, and that's what mattered. She nodded bravely, but I caught her peeking through the blinds anxiously whenever a car slowed near our house. The grocery store incident happened on a Tuesday. We were shopping for dinner when I noticed a woman following us through the aisles, filming with her phone. When I confronted her, she loudly announced I was the person who'd stolen a child from loving parents. Other shoppers turned to stare. Haley pressed against my side, trembling, as I abandoned our half-full cart and hurried her to the car. That night, Haley had her worst nightmare yet. She woke screaming about being dragged back to the mines, begging me not to let them take her. I held her until she calmed down, but neither of us slept after that. We sat in her room playing quiet card games until dawn, both pretending we weren't afraid. My lawyer Catherine called with bad news. My parents had hired a prestigious law firm and were filing a civil suit claiming defamation and emotional distress. They wanted monetary damages that would bankrupt me. Catherine assured me their case was weak, but defending against it would be expensive and time-consuming. Money I didn't have, and time I needed to find work. The job search grew more desperate. I expanded beyond the coal industry, applying for anything that might pay enough to support us. But my parents' reach extended further than I'd imagined. Even companies outside mining had somehow heard about the custody dispute and questions about my character. I started applying under variations of my name, desperate for any opportunity. One evening, while Haley did homework, our doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a well-dressed woman with a briefcase. She introduced herself as a private investigator hired by my parents to document my lifestyle for their civil case. She stood on my porch taking photos and notes. Perfectly legal harassment I couldn't stop. The investigator returned daily, always at different times. She photographed us leaving for school, returning from grocery shopping, even through our windows when the curtains were open. Haley grew paranoid, constantly checking if we were being watched. She stopped playing in the backyard and insisted on keeping her bedroom curtains closed even during daytime. My savings dwindled faster than expected. Therapy sessions for Haley were non-negotiable, but everything else became a careful calculation. I bought generic everything, skipped meals when Haley wasn't looking, and turned the heat down at night. I couldn't let her see how bad things were getting, not when she was finally starting to heal. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tom, the security manager from my parents' company, called me one night. He'd been fired after cooperating with the police investigation, and he had information I needed to hear. We met at a diner outside town, where he revealed my parents were paying people to sabotage my life. He'd overheard them discussing it before his termination. Tom provided names and dates, even some recorded conversations he'd managed to capture. It wasn't enough for criminal charges, but it proved a pattern of harassment. He also warned me they were planning something bigger, though he didn't know what. I thanked him and promised to help him find new work once I was back on my feet. Armed with Tom's information, Catherine filed a restraining order against my parents. The judge granted a temporary order pending a full hearing. For a few days, the harassment stopped. No investigators, no phone calls to neighbors, no mysterious emails to potential employers. Haley smiled more, even laughing at a joke her friend told at school. The peace was short-lived. My parents found a loophole, using third parties to continue their campaign. A concerned citizens group suddenly formed in our neighborhood, distributing flyers about protecting children from questionable guardians. They couldn't mention me by name due to the restraining order, but everyone knew who they meant. Haley's school called about an incident. Some parents had started a petition to have her removed from class, claiming my presence at school events made them uncomfortable. The principal didn't support it, but the controversy was disruptive. Haley came home in tears, saying kids were whispering about her being the stolen girl. I found her that night cutting her own hair with scissors, trying to change how she looked so people wouldn't recognize her from the photos being circulated online. I gently took the scissors away and held her while she sobbed. We spent the evening out her choppy haircut, turning it into a game where she got to pick any style she wanted. The financial pressure reached a breaking point. I'd applied to over 100 jobs with no success. Our savings were nearly gone. I swallowed my pride and applied for government assistance, but the process would take weeks we didn't have. I started selling anything valuable we owned, from jewelry to electronics, just to keep food on the table. Haley noticed when her art supplies ran low, and I couldn't replace them immediately. She stopped asking for things, even necessities, trying to help in her own way. It broke my heart watching her count coins from her piggy bank, offering to contribute. I refused her money but hugged her extra tight that night. A former colleague reached out with a potential job lead. A mining company 3 states away hadn't heard the rumors and needed an experienced manager. The catch was starting immediately and relocating within the month. It would mean uprooting Haley just as she was settling in, but we were running out of options. I discussed it with Haley's therapist, who worried about the impact of sudden change, but she also recognized the toxic environment we were trapped in. She helped me frame it as an adventure for Haley, a fresh start where nobody knew our story. Haley took it better than expected, saying anywhere was fine as long as we were together. While preparing for the job interview, disaster struck again. Our landlord received an anonymous letter claiming I was months behind on rent and running an illegal business from the property. Though I proved both claims false, he gave us 30 days notice, not wanting the drama. My parents had found another way to destabilize our lives. The interview went well despite everything. The company seemed impressed by my experience and didn't mention any rumors. I felt hopeful for the first time in weeks. But during my drive home, I got a call that changed everything. Haley's school reported she'd never arrived that morning. I dropped her off myself, watched her walk through the front doors. Panic consumed me as I raced back. The school security footage showed Haley leaving through a side door shortly after I'd driven away. Her backpack was found abandoned by the playground. My worst fears seemed realized until my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, a photo of Haley sitting in what looked like a restaurant booth. The message said she was safe, but I needed to come alone to discuss her future. The address was a public place, a busy cafe downtown. I called Catherine and the police while driving there, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. They advised me to go in wired for sound, promising backup would be nearby. I found Haley in a back booth with a woman I didn't recognize. My sister looked scared but unharmed, clutching a hot chocolate she hadn't touched. The woman introduced herself as a family reunification specialist, hired by my parents. She spoke calmly about how much my parents missed their daughters and wanted to repair our relationship. Playing along, I sat down and listened to her rehearsed speech about forgiveness and second chances. She claimed my parents realized their mistakes and wanted to make amends. All they asked was for me to drop the criminal charges and agree to supervised visits with Haley. The woman slid a document across the table, a settlement agreement that would end all legal proceedings. I pretended to consider it while texting the police our exact location under the table. The woman grew impatient, mentioning how easy it had been to convince Haley to leave school with her. The implicit threat was clear. They could get to her any time. Haley's eyes filled with tears as she whispered an apology for leaving with a stranger. The police arrived before I had to respond. The woman tried to leave but was detained for questioning. She insisted she'd done nothing illegal, just facilitated a meeting between family members. Technically true, but the investigation revealed she'd misrepresented herself to Haley as a social worker, which was a crime. That night, Haley couldn't stop apologizing. She explained the woman had shown up with official-looking badges and documents, claiming I'd sent her. The woman knew details about our case that seemed legitimate. I reassured Haley it wasn't her fault, while internally raging at my parents for traumatizing her again. The incident strengthened our restraining order case. The judge extended the protection and included anyone acting on my parents' behalf, but I knew paper wouldn't stop them. They'd proven how far they'd go, using Haley's innocence against her. I made the difficult decision to accept the out-of-state job immediately. We left town quietly, telling nobody except Catherine and Haley's therapist. I rented a small apartment near the new job, enrolling Haley in school under our middle names to make us harder to track. For a few weeks, we had peace. Haley made new friends who knew nothing about our past. I excelled at work, grateful for the fresh start. Then the letters started arriving at my new workplace, anonymous complaints about my criminal history and kidnapping charges. My new boss called me in, confused but concerned. I explained the situation, showing him the court documents proving I had legal custody. He believed me, but warned that continued drama could affect my employment. My parents had found us again. The investigator reappeared, now photographing our new apartment and following Haley's school bus. The familiar pattern of harassment resumed in our new town. Neighbors received warning letters. Haley's new friend's parents got anonymous calls. The safe haven we'd tried to create crumbled around us. I considered running again, but realized we'd never truly escape. My parents had resources and determination fueled by their twisted sense of ownership. Every new town would eventually become contaminated by their poison. Haley deserved better than a life spent running and hiding. It was time to fight back properly. Catherine helped me file charges for harassment and stalking across state lines, which made it a federal matter. The FBI got involved due to the interstate nature of the crimes. Agents interviewed us about the pattern of harassment, taking it more seriously than local police had. They found evidence of my parents hiring multiple private investigators and paying people to file false complaints. The investigation revealed something unexpected. My parents' coal company was under federal scrutiny for more than just child labor. They'd been falsifying safety reports for years, bribing inspectors, and covering up accidents. The FBI had been building a case when our situation brought additional attention. Our custody battle had inadvertently exposed larger crimes. My parents' assets were frozen during the investigation. Suddenly, they couldn't afford their expensive lawyers or private investigators. The harassment stopped abruptly as they focused on their own legal troubles. For the first time in months, Haley and I could breathe. We weren't completely safe, but the immediate threat had lessened. Haley thrived in the calm. Her grades improved, she rejoined art club, and her nightmares became less frequent. She still checked locks obsessively and startled at unexpected doorbells, but her therapist said that would fade with time. I focused on work, rebuilding our financial stability, and creating the normal life Haley deserved. The federal case against my parents progressed slowly but steadily. They faced charges for tax evasion, safety violations, bribery, and racketeering. The child labor charges were just the beginning. Former employees came forward with stories of threats and intimidation. My parents' carefully constructed empire was crumbling, and they had nobody to blame but themselves. One morning, Catherine called with news. My parents wanted to make a deal. In exchange for me dropping the harassment charges, they'd sign away all parental rights to Haley and agree to permanent no-contact orders. They needed to focus on fighting the federal charges and couldn't afford distractions. It was the closest thing to victory we could hope for. I discussed it with Haley, who was old enough to have input. She thought carefully before saying she never wanted to see them again anyway. If signing papers meant they'd leave us alone forever, she supported it. Her maturity amazed me. This child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, but somehow retained her kindness. The signing took place at Catherine's office. My parents looked older, their expensive clothes replaced with modest attire. They signed without making eye contact, their lawyer rushing them through the process. As they prepared to leave, my mother paused at the door. For a moment, I thought she might apologize or show some recognition of what they'd done. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and walked out without a word. It was the last time we ever saw them. The federal case continued without our involvement, resulting in significant prison time for both parents. Their company was dissolved, assets liquidated to pay fines and restitution to former employees. The empire built on child labor finally collapsed. Haley and I settled into our new life properly. Without the constant threat hanging over us, we could make real plans. I enrolled in night classes to expand my skills beyond mining. Haley joined the school play and discovered she loved performing. We adopted a rescue dog who barked at strangers, but slept on Haley's bed every night. Healing wasn't linear. We both had bad days where the trauma resurfaced. Haley sometimes woke up convinced she heard digging sounds. I still checked locks multiple times and scrutinized every unknown car, but we faced these challenges together, no longer in survival mode, but actually living. The next morning, I woke to find Haley's bed empty. My heart stopped until I heard her voice from the kitchen, talking to someone. I rushed out to find her on the phone with my mother. She'd somehow gotten our new number and called while I was asleep. Haley handed me the phone with shaking hands. My mother's voice was different, desperate, and raw. She begged for just one meeting, claiming she had information about the federal case that could help us. I told her to contact Catherine if she had anything legitimate to say, and hung up, but the damage was done. Haley spent the rest of the day jumpy and distracted. That afternoon, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a photo album I'd never seen before, filled with pictures of me and Haley as babies. Normal family photos, the kind other kids had. My mother had included a note saying these were all she had left and wanted us to have them. I recognized the manipulation tactic, but couldn't bring myself to throw them away. Catherine called with concerning news. My parents' lawyer had filed a motion claiming the no-contact agreement was signed under duress due to the federal charges. They were trying to get it thrown out. She assured me it was a long shot, but we'd need to appear in court again to defend it. The cycle was starting all over again. I found Haley in her room that night, staring at the baby photos. She traced her finger over a picture of our mother holding her as a newborn, looking genuinely happy. I sat beside her, unsure what to say. She asked if I remembered our mother ever being nice. I told her I had a few memories from when I was very young, before the mines became everything. The court date arrived faster than expected. My parents sat across from us, looking haggard from their ongoing federal case. Their new lawyer argued that the emotional state caused by criminal charges had impaired their judgment when signing away parental rights. The judge seemed skeptical, but allowed them to present their case. My father took the stand, spinning a tale of reformed parents who'd seen the error of their ways. He claimed the federal investigation had opened their eyes to how they'd failed us. He even produced certificates from parenting classes they'd supposedly attended. His performance was convincing enough that I saw doubt creep into the judge's expression. When Catherine cross-examined him, she asked specific questions about the child labor. My father smoothly deflected, claiming it was a misunderstanding of their cultural values around hard work. He painted himself as an immigrant father, trying to instill discipline, not a child abuser. I watched in horror as he reframed our trauma into a cultural miscommunication. Haley surprised everyone by asking to speak. The judge allowed it, though she wasn't required to testify. My sister stood up, her voice steady, as she described specific incidents our father was glossing over. She She talked about the time she'd collapsed from exhaustion and been forced to keep working. She mentioned the infected cuts on her hands from the equipment that were never treated. My mother broke down crying as Haley spoke, but I noticed she kept glancing at their lawyer as if checking she was playing her part correctly. When Haley finished, my mother asked to address her directly. The judge allowed it against Catherine's objections. My mother apologized profusely, claiming she'd been controlled by my father and too scared to protect us. The judge took a recess to review everything. I held Haley in the hallway while she shook from the effort of confronting them. Catherine warned us that my parents' new approach was more sophisticated than before. They were playing the reformed sinner's angle perfectly, and judges sometimes fell for it. When court resumed, the judge upheld the no-contact order, but added a provision. In 1 year, my parents could petition for supervised communication if they completed extensive therapy and parenting courses. It wasn't the complete victory we'd wanted, but it bought us time. My parents' lawyer smiled slightly, and I realized this had been their goal all along. We left court to find reporters waiting. Someone had tipped off local media about the family torn apart by cultural differences. My parents emerged playing the victims perfectly, talking about redemption and second chances. I shielded Haley from the cameras and refused to comment, but the damage was done. The narrative was shifting in their favor. The media attention brought unexpected consequences. People who'd supported us before now questioned whether we'd overreacted. Comments online suggested I was keeping Haley from parents who'd made mistakes but were trying to change. Some even accused me of cultural insensitivity. The public tide was turning, just as my parents had planned. Haley faced bullying at school from kids who'd seen the news coverage. They called her ungrateful and asked why she was being mean to her parents. She came home with bruises one day, refusing to tell me what happened. The principal said without witnesses, there was nothing they could do. I knew my parents' campaign was working exactly as intended. Tom called with urgent news. He'd been approached by someone offering him money for inside information about me. They wanted dirt from when I'd worked at the mining company, anything that could be used against me. He'd pretended to agree to find out more. The person funding it was using shell companies, but Tom was certain it traced back to my parents. I realized they were building a case for the 1-year mark. Every piece of negative information, every doubt planted in the public mind would be ammunition when they petitioned to contact Haley again. They were playing a long game, and we were already losing. I had to find a way to protect my sister permanently. Catherine suggested a radical option. If I could prove my parents were violating the spirit of the no-contact order through third parties, we might get it made permanent with no review option. But we'd need concrete evidence of them orchestrating the harassment. It was risky, because if we failed, it might actually help their case. I hired my own investigator with money I couldn't afford to spend. He started tracking the shell companies Tom had identified, following paper trails and financial records. Meanwhile, I kept Haley's routine as normal as possible, driving her to school myself and picking her up immediately after. We stopped going anywhere unnecessary, living in a state of siege. The investigator found connections, but nothing definitive. Money moved through too many hands to prove my parents were the source. He needed more time and resources I didn't have. I took out a loan against my future earnings, gambling everything on finding proof before the year was up. Haley's therapist reported concerning changes. My sister had started expressing guilt about testifying against our parents. She wondered if maybe they really had changed and deserved another chance. The constant media narrative was wearing her down, making her question her own memories. I watched helplessly as my parents' manipulation worked even from a distance. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of my parents' former employees reached out after seeing the news coverage. She'd overheard conversations about hiring people to influence public opinion. She had recordings on her phone, made secretly when she'd suspected she might be fired. The audio quality was poor, but you could hear my father discussing the campaign. We took everything to Catherine, who immediately filed for an emergency hearing. The judge agreed to review the evidence in chambers. My parents' lawyer fought hard to exclude the recordings, claiming they were illegally obtained. The legal arguments went back and forth for hours, while Haley and I waited outside. The judge finally ruled the recordings were admissible, as they showed ongoing violation of the no-contact order. She scheduled a full hearing for the following week to determine if the order should be made permanent without review. My parents' lawyer immediately filed for a postponement, but it was denied. They'd have to face the evidence. That night, Haley asked if we were bad people for not giving our parents another chance. The media campaign had done its job, making her doubt everything. I explained that loving someone didn't mean accepting abuse, and that protecting ourselves wasn't cruel. She nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The week passed in a blur of preparation. More former employees came forward with stories of my parents' manipulation. The investigator connected several shell companies directly to accounts my parents controlled. Catherine built a comprehensive case showing the orchestrated harassment campaign. Everything hinged on the judge believing it was intentional violation. The morning of the hearing, I found a note slipped under our door. It was from my mother, handwritten and desperate. She begged me to reconsider, claiming my father had forced her to go along with everything. She offered to testify against him if I'd let her have supervised visits with Haley. I recognized it as another manipulation, but felt a twist of doubt myself. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, financial records, and witness testimonies painted a clear picture of deliberate harassment. My parents' lawyer tried to argue it was the work of overzealous supporters, not my parents directly. But the judge saw through it, her expression growing sterner with each piece of evidence. My father made one last play, standing up to address the court directly. He talked about redemption and forgiveness, quoting scripture and appealing to family values. He claimed any actions taken were out of desperate love for his children. His performance was passionate and might have worked if not for all the evidence against him. The judge's ruling was decisive. The no-contact order was made permanent, with no possibility of review. Any attempt to contact us directly or through third parties would result in immediate arrest. She also referred the harassment evidence to the prosecutor for potential additional charges. My parents had gambled everything and lost. As we left the courthouse, I saw saw my mother crying genuine tears for the first time. Not the manipulative displays she'd perfected, but real grief. For a moment, I saw the woman she might have been in a different life, but then my father grabbed her arm, his mask slipping to show the fury beneath, and I remembered why we needed protection. The media narrative shifted again after the ruling. The evidence of harassment was too damning to ignore. People who'd criticized me apologized, admitting they'd been fooled. The reporters who'd hounded us moved on to other stories. Slowly, our lives returned to something approaching normal. Haley's relief was palpable. The weight she'd carried, the guilt and uncertainty, began to lift. She stopped checking locks obsessively and started sleeping through the night. At school, the bullying stopped as kids moved on to other dramas. She even rejoined art club and made new friends who didn't know our history. 3 months later, Catherine called with final news. My parents had been convicted on multiple federal charges and would serve significant prison time. Their assets were liquidated to pay fines and restitution. The empire they'd built on the backs of children was gone forever. Justice had taken longer than expected, but it had finally arrived. I told Haley that evening, unsure how she'd react. She thought for a long moment before saying she felt sad for them, but not guilty anymore. They'd made their choices just like we'd made ours. Her wisdom continued to amaze me, this child who'd survived so much and come out kind. We marked the anniversary of her rescue with a quiet celebration, just the two of us and our dog. Haley painted a picture of our little family, including the dog wearing a silly hat. Looking at her artwork, I saw hope and healing in every brushstroke. We'd won not just the legal battles, but something more important. 6 months after the final ruling, I got promoted at work. My boss said my dedication and integrity had impressed everyone. The raise meant I could pay off the loans and start saving for Haley's college fund. We celebrated with ice cream and talked about her dreams of becoming an art teacher. Haley thrived in high school, joining drama club and discovering she loved set design. She combined her art skills with storytelling, creating magical worlds for school plays. I attended every performance, cheering embarrassingly loud from the audience. These normal moments felt like miracles after everything we'd survived. On her 16th birthday, Haley surprised me by saying she wanted to volunteer with at-risk youth. She remembered feeling alone and wanted to help other kids who might be trapped in bad situations. We found a program where she could mentor younger children through art therapy. Watching her turn pain into purpose filled me with pride. The nightmares faded, but never fully disappeared. Sometimes Haley still woke up thinking she heard digging sounds. I still double-checked locks and startled at unexpected mail. But these moments became rarer, overwhelmed by new memories of family dinners, movie nights, and lazy Sunday mornings with our dog sprawled between us. Graduation day arrived faster than seemed possible. Haley walked across the stage in her cap and gown, beaming as she accepted her diploma. She'd been accepted to art school with a partial scholarship. In the audience, I cried happy tears, remembering the malnourished 11-year-old who'd arrived at my door years ago. Before leaving for college, Haley hugged me tight and thanked me for saving her. I told her she'd saved herself by being brave enough to survive and kind enough to heal. We'd saved each other, really. Two kids who'd been taught that love meant control had learned to build something better. She thrived at art school, calling weekly to share her adventures. Her professors praised her unique perspective and emotional depth in her work. She made friends who became chosen family, people who loved her for who she was. Every success felt like a victory against the people who'd tried to break us. I started dating someone who understood our story without judgment. They were patient with my trust issues and protective instincts. Haley approved after a thorough interrogation over Thanksgiving dinner. Watching them laugh together at the table, I felt a completeness I'd never imagined possible. Years passed in a blur of ordinary miracles. Haley graduated, became an art therapist, and helped other trauma survivors find healing through creativity. She met someone wonderful who treated her with the respect she deserved. I walked her down the aisle at her wedding, both of us crying happy tears. The past never fully left us, but it no longer defined us. We'd built lives filled with love, purpose, and chosen family. Sometimes I'd catch Haley checking locks or see her flinch at certain sounds, but then she'd laugh at something silly or lose herself in painting, and I'd see how far we'd come. Our parents died in prison within months of each other. We learned through Catherine, who handled the legal notifications. Neither of us attended the funerals. Haley painted one abstract piece full of dark colors and sharp edges, then declared herself done with that chapter. We donated the painting to a charity auction and never spoke of it again. Life continued in beautiful, ordinary ways. Haley had children who knew only love and encouragement. I became the uncle who spoiled them rotten. We created new traditions, building the family we'd always deserved. Every holiday, every birthday, every random Tuesday dinner together was a gift. Looking at Haley now, successful and happy, no one would guess our beginning. She'd transformed trauma into compassion, helping countless others through her work. I'd learned that family wasn't about blood, but about showing up, protecting each other, and choosing love over control. We'd won by refusing to let our past define our future. The scars remained, but faded to silver over time. We'd learned that healing wasn't about forgetting, but about building something better from the broken pieces. Our story wasn't unique, but our survival was ours. Two kids from the mines who dug their way to sunlight and learned to thrive in its warmth.